Welcome back to another episode of the Pax What She Said podcast. I'm one of your co-hosts, Maggie Loney, joined as always by Perry Goldstein, and it is the episode that we look forward to every year, talking to Andrew Mertig about the NFL draft. We are, 10 days away, 9 days away at this point, single digits here, getting ready for the draft in Green Bay. Very exciting for the Packers, for Packers fans. And Andrew, there's nobody we'd rather talk about it with than you.
Well, that's very nice. I was planning to come in here so hot this year, and you both said really nice things about me last week, which has completely unsettled me, and I don't know how to respond. You've been so gracious because this is my third consecutive year. And if you remember, year one, I was real unhappy about LVN over JSN. And then last year, I apologized about it. And now this year, I'm back. So I got a little Michael Scott snip snap snip thing going on here with my view of the 23 draft. But it's another year and another bunch of players we're gonna get really excited about, and only 1 out of 32 are gonna end up on the Packers.
Yeah, I love that our listeners have gotten to watch your LVN journey through the years.
It's like character development.
I'm back on the negative train, but hey, year 3 for a really high upside edge rusher typically is when they're going to break out if they are. So reason to move back to optimism for next year.
All right, so let's stay in that vein, right? Because that's, I think, been the running joke, is that LVN has not been the player that you were very excited about for the Packers to draft. And we talked a little bit pre-show about this draft class and the way that it stacks up. It aligns well, I think, with some of what our perceived needs are for the Packers. So that is helpful. But in that, sometimes I think we start to fall in love with players that we think are really good fits. And then we get our hopes up that those players are going to be there. And then those players are there. And then the Packers go a different direction. So let's talk with you about players that you are most excited about, either their potential to be there at 23, players you could maybe even see the Packers trading up for. Who are you excited about in round 1?
This is such a weird draft class. And Kyle and I were recording some of the On the Clock series last night, and we were talking about who do you think it's going to be, and it's so hard to identify because we have no idea how picks 8 through 22 are going to play out. Every mock draft I see looks completely different, and every mock draft I do looks completely different. So to identify who's going to be there and who's not is really difficult. But some of the players that I would get really excited about that I think have at least a little bit of a chance to get there, number 1 by far is Will Johnson, the cornerback out of Michigan. To me, he's he's my second overall player in this class. So the idea that he's going to somehow escape the top 10 is crazy to me, but there's lots of people saying that, lots of people who know a lot more than I do. And so if he were to slide, he's the kind of player I would love for the Packers to even target to trade up a little bit into the teens. And I think trading up this year is going to be cheaper than most years because of the perceived value between picks 11 and maybe 40 of really similarly graded players. Will Johnson, he's not as long as we thought he was. He's maybe not as athletic on the track as we thought he was. But if you watch the tape, this is an elite player in my opinion. And I think he would be cornerback 1 before we know it in Green Bay. So that's my draft crush this year, and the idea that the Packers could get him is wild. And last year, my top 2 corners slid all the way to the 2 picks in front of Green Bay and then got snatched up. So hoping to not see a repeat, especially since his former college coach is picking exactly 1 pick before the Packers this year. A couple of edge rushers. I know people have very mixed feelings about them, but Shamar Stewart from Texas A&M, Michael Williams from Georgia, talk about LVN. Why would I like these 2 guys if I didn't like LVN? Because they're very similar kinds of players, ridiculous upside. With Stewart, it's a massive lack of college production. To me, there's some justification because I think Texas A&M was asking a lot of their edge rushers, defensive linemen, to really just hold their own and not necessarily be penetrators. I think Stewart has that skill set to be a truly elite player at the NFL level. I think Williams, again, super big upside. That's another swing of the bat in the vein of Rashawn Gary and LVN. And I know maybe mixed results there, but those are the kind of players you definitely want to take a chance at. I love Kenneth Grant, the defensive lineman from Michigan. I really love who was I going to mention next? I forgot. Oh, cornerback Maxwell Hairston out of Kentucky. He's a guy that like I think will be there. And he's the kind of athlete that I think, you see maybe like a Marshawn Lattimore or a Denzel Ward style of player that could be really, really fantastic at the NFL level, despite being a little bit smaller than you would prefer. And then a final one. This is somebody who's not getting a lot of first round buzz, but if they took him, I would still be excited and nobody else would. And that's Oregon tackle Josh Connerly Jr., who to me is like a year from now going to be one of the best offensive linemen out of this class. He's just maybe not ready today. So I think you could sit him for a year and he could be the Rasheed Walker replacement if they didn't want to pay him into 2026.
So I was going to say, until you hit your last one, that everyone you mentioned is on the defensive side of the ball. So you think that's where they're going in the first round?
I think that's where the value really meets the Packers' needs. If there was a wide receiver that I was like really crushing on that I thought would be available at 23, I think that is a very realistic possibility. I still think that's a possibility. I'm just maybe not as high on Tetairoa McMillan as a lot of people are. I don't think Matthew Golden gets there, and he's not necessarily my like cup of tea either. And I think Emeka Ibuka, who is my wide receiver one, is a little redundant on this team. Like I feel like they already have players that are going to occupy the kind of reps that he would take. So I don't see making that investment in the first round. But we'll see. I mean, maybe the Packers finally bucked the trend with the draft in Green Bay. I don't know. I know for a fact. I don't know for a fact. I'm projecting here. I think that the Packers have wanted to take a wide receiver in the first round several times over the last 6 or 7 years, and it just hasn't worked out for them. The board hasn't fallen that way. So I don't think that they have anything against taking a wide receiver. I just think like with the depth of defensive line, edge, corner in this class, the odds that the Packers are going to get a really good one that slides to them is very high. So those are the players that I'm probably the most excited about.
Mm-hmm. I think it's challenging too. Like you said, it seems to happen, always because it's the NFL draft, right? Nothing is ever predictable. But the Packers, where they're drafting this year at 23, the teams that are in front of them making selections, and we saw this in our listener mock, the teams really kind of all have similar needs in this like late teens, early 20s block, which makes it really challenging for the Packers. They'd have to kind of consider leapfrogging. And that also kind of means there might be talent available for them still on the board. It's a really deep edge class, really deep defensive line class. But you've got, like the Broncos at 20, they're in the market for a wide receiver. The Chargers could use a wide receiver. So if the Packers were going to take a swing at a wide receiver, there's two teams right there that could snatch them up. You've got, the Buccaneers could really use some help at edge or DB, depending on where they're going. The Chargers, you mentioned it, Harbaugh's there wanting potentially two Michigan prospects who would both fit really well with the Packers at 23. So I think that's also a challenge here for Green Bay, is knowing that in this year specifically, it feels like there's a lot of players who are going to get really, really close, and they might just not get to 23 for the Packers.
Yeah, and like 49ers at 11, Cowboys at 12, Dolphins at 13, Colts at 14, Falcons at 15, Cardinals at 16 to a point. They all need interior offensive linemen. There's really not like a lot in this class. So that's where like projecting gets weird, because like number one, we always are wondering where the quarterback's going to fall. So there is a scenario where 4 quarterbacks go before the Packers pick. And that, like, if you told me that 2 weeks ago, I would have called you nuts and told you to go home. But I also would have said the same thing about 6 going last year. Mm-hmm. And so this sudden push of Jalen Milroe, could he land somewhere in the first round? And I know most people are thinking like some team probably trades up a few spots just to get that 5th-year option right at the end. But maybe, Jackson Dart goes 9 to the Saints, and then the Steelers are feeling real itchy about getting a quarterback in there, and that ends up being Milroe, and suddenly like that's potentially 2 more players that are sliding down to the Packers. You could have like I mentioned, interior offensive lineman is a huge need in this first round ahead of the Packers. That could push some players up that we're not expecting. I think running backs also kind of a sneaky one as well. Like, do we get 2 running backs, which I think most people would think is probably pretty likely. I actually think there could be a third. Travion Henderson, somebody nobody's talking about as like a teens kind of pick. I think he could sneak in there, kind of a Jahmyr Gibbs like rise late in the draft process for him. You have to wonder where the receivers are going to fall. So those could push some more defenders down as well. So players that I think, especially in a quote unquote weak first round, we could see some players like Shamar Stewart, who shouldn't be falling this far in a normal draft class, actually slide because there's some needs for teams in front of the Packers that might push those offensive players up a little bit.
Yeah. Everything you're saying is making me wonder. I mean, Goot has yet to do this. So I'm curious because he tends to be either a stay put or be aggressive GM, like the opposite of Ted Thompson. But if there's a world where this is his first draft where he actually trades back.
Yeah, I mean, to me, the value of this class is somewhere between like 30 and 50, because I think there's a lot of players in that range that are going to be really similarly graded to what you see in picks 11 through 30. And so if you can get more of those selections, obviously that's going to work out in your advantage. So if there was a way that they could trade down to the end of the first, pick up a second that's, in the middle or end of the second round, and then get 3 of those players instead of 2, that goes a long way, especially knowing that the Packers' primary needs are going to fall somewhere between wide receiver, defensive line, edge, cornerback, and maybe offensive line as well. If you're addressing 3 of those positions, suddenly you don't feel so bad about the position you're in going into the year.
Yeah, so I think you outlined at least some players that you would be really excited about for the Packers. Let's flip it then and talk about your Lucas Van Ness picks in the first round, guys that you would be not.
I hate that this has happened for him.
Not that, and we talked about it, right? There's always like the predictable pick, and sometimes the predictable pick is the one that you're not excited about, right? We talked about it last year. Jordan Morgan was like, "This makes sense. This is fine." Not like hyped about it. It's not like we would have been, if you had said pre-show Terrion Arnold. Cooper DeJean was, I know, a player that a lot of Packers fans wanted. Like, there's players certainly that you get a little more excited about than others. So I guess it doesn't have to be players that you don't like, but just players that you wouldn't necessarily be thrilled about on night one.
Yeah, there's a lot that goes into that. First of all, it's very rare that I'm not quote unquote excited about a player. It's just that, like, okay, I take that back. That has happened before. Justin Harrell's a great example. But I think, like, if you're getting decent value, it's hard to like jump up and down and, go out and buy a Jordan Morgan jersey. I had Jordan Morgan ranked almost exactly where the Packers picked him. So it's like, okay, that's good value. But I got really excited about the potential for Quinyon Mitchell or Terrion Arnold falling to them. And then, of course, they get sniped right before the Packers pick, and my heart is broken. And now I'm like, do I understand that pick? 100%. Do I think long-term it's going to end up being a really good value? Yeah, but I'm just not like excited about it. So I think almost anybody that the Packers selected here, I could see the rationale. But some of the players that I would be a little bit more like apprehensive about, I mentioned him already, Tetairoa McMillan, the wide receiver from Arizona. Like, he's a good player. I just, like, I don't know. Are we looking to throw back shoulders on the sideline? Like, to me, that's more of a Aaron Rodgers target than a Jordan Love. I've made this comparison before, but to me, he's like a plus version of Allen Lazard, and that's fine. That's a good player in the NFL, but that's not going to get me excited. Like, he's not a dynamic vertical threat. I think he's a really good contested catcher. Sometimes that makes me a little scary based on how past players have performed, who have that skill set. Like, maybe he's T. Higgins. Maybe he's like a little bit less dynamic Drake London. Like, that would be great.
That's the comp that the NFL actually draft profile has for him is Drake London, which like when you see it, you're like, okay, sure. Right. You know, like, yeah, okay.
And Drake London very well may have a phenomenal year this year. But like, is that going to get you excited to be like, okay, well, at his ceiling, this guy's going to take 2 years to come around. He's going to be like solid as a rookie, good as a second year player, maybe jumps into that like wide receiver 12 range by the time he is in year 3. Awesome. He'll always be a good blocker. Like, that's fine. But I'm not going to get really excited about it. I know this is a player Maggie loves, so I need to tread very carefully here. But Landon Jackson, the edge out of Arkansas.
No, okay. I don't love him. I just think he is a very goody player.
100%. And that's why I mention him, because I do think that if those other edge rushers are gone, that is a very realistic possibility. Mm-hmm. And that's a player who I could definitely get behind. I think he could be a really good pro. I would love if they would trade down a little bit to mm-hmm. Perry's point, like maybe jump down 5 or 6 spots, get a little bit more ammunition. So if he doesn't end up being like this super high ceiling player and he's more of a like just really good fit, maybe an underrated kind of edge rusher that, you know, you don't feel that blow so much as if you took him at 23. There's like the Nick Scortons of the world. He's very like, I like him, but he's kind of blah. I would say a developmental, I know I'm talking out of both sides of my mouth here. I mentioned the Oregon tackle, Josh Connerly Jr., but Arante Ursary is a super developmental tackle out of Minnesota that I could see going at the end of the first round, but like there are some fundamental problems there. Like this is the guy who is an elite mover. The skills are crazy good, but like his technical abilities are nowhere near ready for the NFL. And so if the Packers take him and they're just like punting on another year of rookie production for a player that, first of all, you don't want to play, and second of all, probably can't play, and you're just like, well, he's going to be really awesome in 2026. Like, I would prefer we're not doing that at this stage in the team's development. I know a lot of people love him, and Kyle does. So, you know, maybe he will end up phenomenal. Trey Amos, the corner out of Ole Miss, mm-hmm. doesn't excite me. I think he's a good player. I don't know. I'm missing something there, so maybe I need to go back and watch him. But those are the kind of players that I could see going there that probably don't get me as excited as some of the other players I mentioned earlier.
Yeah. And I mean, I think to your point, like there's a lot of players that fit and make sense. And part of it is, like you said, the value of where these players are going. Landon Jackson makes a ton of sense if you trade into, you know, even the early second or like the late first. But if they were to like trade up with some of these guys that you already mentioned on the board, like a Kenneth Grant, or if like a Derek Harmon's there, or there's, you know, some of these, even Walter Nolan, I know that you're not as high on him, but some of these players that you think are ready now to make an impact on this roster, and then they take a player that you think maybe they could have gotten in the late first or early second, that's a little bit deflating. And I think part of it, and you know, I would like you both to weigh in on this too, is does it have to do more with the draft being in Green Bay this year? You know, because I think there's like this atmosphere of this pick is such a legacy pick for the Packers, and it's not fair to them, right? But if the Packers go up there and they take a, you know, like a guard, I think Packer fans will be like, oh, you know, like they want to see the big flashy.
The Packers would so do that though.
Or they trade out of the first round, right? And then they don't get to pick on night one in Green Bay.
I don't know that I'm thinking about it so much that way. I can see if I was going, like all the hype surrounding it. I think I'm more in the camp of what Andrew was alluding to, which is like, you really feel like the Packers should be drafting someone this season who can play or at least make an impact immediately. Like they're so close. They're like right on that cusp of really contending in the NFC. And so to have like another year where your first round pick is a developmental guy or is like not quite ready to play until 2026, it's like, why? Just, I mean, if the board falls that way, maybe. I mean, we could always talk ourselves into a player. I think a little bit did it last year with Jordan Morgan, who literally didn't play at all. But I'm more of like, I'm sure, you know, this person will be like the person who got picked in Green Bay, but I think more hyper focused on like, are they going to contribute now or not? And I've never been that way either. I'm like, so like the Packers draft and develop, like blah, blah, blah. But now I'm looking at this team, like they're like a few pieces from it. And like, you should be going in now.
Yeah, and they are in a window, even despite having to pay Jordan Love, where they can afford to say we're playing for now. And so I look at, you know, the way that the Lions had constructed their team. One of the worst things for the Packers, and I say this sort of tongue in cheek, is like being as successful as they were a year ago, because that playoff, the end of the season and the playoff run set expectations probably way higher than they should have been for this previous season. And so obviously it's good to have those experiences. We want to win, but I think people were probably a little bit too high on where this team was. Now the expectations have to change. You have to flip the script and say, all right, we need to be competing now. And it doesn't mean draft like 25-year-old rookies and like try to like, you know, do everything you can, trade all your future picks for players. No, you can still build through young players, but I think they have to be more ready to contribute now, because you can see where the weaknesses are. The NFC is competitive, but it's not the AFC. And so you don't have those big time quarterbacks in your way. So you should be able to compete with the Detroits, probably going to take a step back this year. Philly, I don't know. That's an up and down team. So you never know where they're going to be. And, you know, then it's teams like the Rams, who I think the Packers are every bit as good as right now. And Washington, yes, they're up and coming, but like they really overachieved last year. So you feel like the Packers still should be a step or two ahead of them. So let's get some players in the door now who can help you to compete today and also give you a little bit of upside moving forward.
Yeah, and I mean, I think it's admirable what the Packers do, right? They always are restocking the cupboard, which means their cupboard is never bare. Their window is at least always cracked open, and they've made a legacy of that, right? That historically the Packers have been a better football team than a not good football team. And I know people in the comments will harken back to like the 70s and the 80s, and I understand all of that completely. But to both of your points, you know, as you continue to stock the cupboard, you know, that's great, but it doesn't do much for you in the immediate win now mode. And I think the Packers are in a really nice opportunity. Like we said, they're a couple pieces away. So it would be kind of just disappointing to see them continue to like stack some blue chip players that it's like, well, in a couple of years, let's just, you know, keep these cans in the cupboard. And we want to see the product, I guess, being made. So Andrew, let's talk about sleepers. We talked about some first round players that you really like. We talked about guys that fit well with what we think the Packers are going to do. Who would be some players that would excite you on even like day 3, or I don't know, undrafted guys that you would really like to see fit with Green Bay?
Yeah, quite a few. I would be remiss if I didn't take absolutely every chance I get on any platform to mention Elik Iomanor, the wide receiver out of Stanford, my favorite player in this class by far. And I don't think he ends up in Green Bay. 23 is too high to take him. He probably goes early second round based on, I think, value, and the Packers shouldn't be picking there. So unless there was a trade down, and even in a trade down situation, I feel like there's other needs that are bigger. If you look at mock draftable, they compare your players to about 6 players who are in the NFL or maybe have played in the NFL in the past. And 2 of his 6 are Romeo Doubs and Dontavian Wicks. So he is a duplication of skill set that the Packers probably don't need, but he is one of my favorite wide receiver prospects ever. Part of it is he is just a like mean, nasty run blocker. At like Hines Ward, he will beat you up. You see corners out west like trying to fight him in the first quarter. They're already so frustrated with his blocking. So I love that part of it. He's also a former track athlete. he went to Stanford, but he turned down like all of the big academic institutions to go to Stanford. So this is a brilliant person too. Love his skill set, really strong hands. I think he can improve as a route runner. He's maybe not like the quickest twitch guy. I think if he starts to develop those skill sets, you can see a ceiling where he takes on a like Romeo Doubs kind of role with the team. Just even a plus blocker on top of what Doubs does. So really, really love him. I think somebody I have heard like nobody talking about at all is Louisville edge rusher Ashton. I think it's Jalot.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know if the T's are silent, but he's fun. Like he is a Packers-ish edge rusher, and
very
I could
freaky
see
relative athletic score too.
Yeah, big time athlete, super explosive. The production is lacking a little bit, but I think this is a guy that I would not be shocked at all if the Packers punt on edge rusher on day one. He could be a second round pick. I think if you went on to, Pro Football Focus mock draft simulator, you're probably getting him in the third or fourth. But like, I think realistically, given his athleticism, probably a second round pick. And I think that could be a sneaky good value for the Packers as well. Other sleepers, I like Colorado State wide receiver Torrey Horton. He's a guy who like totally fell off the map last year. And I still think is a really fun prospect. He had a really good relative athletic score as well. But a guy that was super, super productive and looked good when Colorado State was playing better competition as well. So I like him as a potential sleeper, maybe a day 3 guy. That's somebody I would love if the Packers end up not finding a good fit at wide receiver. The second, third round's a little iffy wide receiver wise, in my opinion. So maybe slide into day 3 would be all right as well. And if I have to pick one more, Wyatt Millum, he played tackle at West Virginia, but he is a perfect kick inside project just because he's got short arms. And I think he has all the movement skills of a tackle, but you'd like to see that length a little bit better. So could he be the next guy who survives that tackle based on like a skill set? Sure. I mean, you can't compare everybody in the world to David Bakhtiari because he's such an outlier. But like, I think this is the guy you look at and you say, okay, we could probably get him in the 3rd round, kick him inside to guard, like let him fail at tackle first. He probably does. You move him inside to guard. I think you have a starter for 8 years. I think he is really solid, like a very good technician and somebody with a ton of athletic skills for somebody who's being projected at guard.
Can I make you feel better really quick about
Sure.
Moore? Well, I think there's a world where the Packers don't bring Romeo Doubs back and then he's not redundant and they need to fill that role, with someone. And I'm not even being facetious as I say this, like there is 100% a world where they know they can't bring both him and Christian Watson back, or whatever's going on with his concussions means he's feeling differently about football. And they actually do need someone to fill that spot. So don't write him off for that reason.
I also mentioned he has track speed, and he was never asked to do this at Stanford, but if they're really looking for a guy to blow the top off the defense, I don't think he's a perfect fit, but I think he can play in that role. And in the same way that we've seen Wicks and Doubs get behind defenders in the NFL because they have good enough speed, I think Iomanor is probably a little bit faster than those guys, but like on-field speed, he can do that too. So, in the short term, if you're just looking for somebody to run off defenders, he can play a lot of that Christian Watson role. He's certainly a blocker enough to do it. And then, in the long term, you hope he develops better route running and then maybe could step in if Doubs is not back in 26.
I want to ask you where you have Jacob Parrish graded, the corner out of Kansas State, because I love him. And I know that the very first comment is going to be that he's 5'9"-ish, right? And he doesn't really serve the Goody thresholds that we all covet for corner when playing in Green Bay, but he is like short and thick and he plays bigger than 5'9", and he's aggressive and he played outside of Kansas State, but now we're hearing that maybe NFL teams are thinking the Packers paid Nate Hobbs to actually be their slot corner or their nickel instead of playing boundary. But if you draft a guy who's 5'9", there's probably a good shot you're playing him in your nickel and not on your boundaries. So like, do you have any hard feelings on Parrish? Because I love him, but to me, he's just one of those prospects I'm trying not to get too excited about because it feels like such a reach for Goody to actually bring him in.
Packers have a whole cornerback room of just nickels.
just nobody over 6 feet, please. I love Parrish. He's player 56 for me. I almost mentioned him in the sleepers conversation. My eyeballs were drawn to him, and then I was like, I'll move on. Talked about corners enough, but yeah, that's a great call. I like that he is able to play man and zone both really well, and that weirdly enough, never a skill set that you find in college. Like college teams tend to primarily play one of the two coverages. Players excel in one or the other. I think he can play both. I think he has really good ball skills as well, which is not necessarily super common in this draft class. And he is, I think, a good tackler given his size, right? Like he doesn't have the length. He doesn't necessarily like always have an advantageous situation when he's going into a tackle, but I think he's willing, and he's a good rapper, which I like because who was the player I was just complaining? Oh, Maxwell Hairston, who I love, is a striker. And that's what got Jair in a lot of trouble in his career is he wanted to hit people instead of tackle them. And sometimes it would cause missed tackles, but most often it would cause Jair physical problems. And I like to see smaller guys who want to wrap up, even if it is a very risky proposition, right? Because like sometimes a big receiver is going to get away from you when you try to wrap up their legs. But yeah, Parrish, he's feisty. I like that a lot. And so yeah, I have him at, what did I say, 56? Yeah, that's correct. So end of the second round, what did the Packers pick? 50 something. That 54, I think. Is that right?
54, yeah.
And so yeah, I mean, Parrish would be right there for me. That would be interesting, but he's the kind of player who overcomes the size on tape. So that's what I like to see.
Cool. I mean, Perry and I have our mock draft next week, so we're going to be taking notes, and we'll have the Andrew sleepers that we throw in here. But any final thoughts, Perry? Any questions you want to ask Andrew before we wrap this one up?
No, I guess the thing that I'm thinking of is we've been so hyper focused on basically 3 position groups. And I would love real quick, because look, there is absolutely a world where the Packers don't pick in those categories early if the board doesn't fall right. So it's hard to envision them picking a safety or a linebacker or a running back or somewhere but I can see them taking a tight end, which doesn't feel that sneaky of a need with basically just one right now proven. So any guys in the categories we haven't mentioned that you like love and would be like, I know this isn't a quote unquote need, but like, I'm so happy that we have them.
Yeah, so safety is interesting because I have let my mind wander there. Malachi Starks is a player that should be talked about as like a top 12, 15 player in this class. And for whatever reason, it might be the positional value of safety. It might be that he was not as productive this past season as he was earlier in his college career. This is a guy who's phenomenal. And in any other circumstance other than the Packers drafting 3 safeties and signing the biggest free agent on the market last offseason, I would be like clamoring for this guy. Is there a weird world where they take Starks and they play McKinney and Starks, and then they bring Evan Williams in as like a third safety in passing downs, and Javon Bullard just becomes a corner, like a slot corner full time? I don't know. Maybe. Probably not, but I would get excited about that. Nick Emanwari is very interesting. I don't know if Jeff Hafley really loves that like hybrid linebacker role, but that's a player who could literally play all 3 downs. So he's, on first down, he could play safety, and then you just bring in your nickel package and becomes a linebacker. And with Quay and Edge Cooper, you could play 3 linebackers, but you're not really playing 3 linebackers. You have the versatility to do whatever you want. So safety, it would be wild and people would be very upset, but I could see that a little bit. Tight end, less likely. Kyle and I were joking last night. We were talking, not for a recording, but I just mentioned, could it be Colston Loveland? And he said something about being too similar to Luke Musker. And I was like, yeah, you're right. We have Colston Loveland at home. But it's like the always injured B+ version of Colston Loveland. So that would be fun. The Packers could finally implement my dream of an NFL team going 3 tight ends full time. And
That's
just, we're gonna run the ball until you get out of your base, and then we're gonna split our tight ends out wide and beat you up on the perimeter. Nobody's gonna do that. Maybe the 49ers.
They have the horses for that, though. I mean, watching that run game this past season, I'm like, are we gonna move the needle here on the run game? I don't know.
I've just been waiting for a team to do that. That and recycling rookie quarterbacks, never paying your guy. We've had some conspiracy theories about the 49ers doing this with Purdy, but I'm sure going to pay him.
I ask you because the Packers brought in Isaiah Simmons, right?
Yeah.
Which okay. I mean, he's a free agent that's still available, and I'm sure it's a due diligence thing. But I just thought it was a really interesting choice, given that he's kind of that linebacker safety hybrid. You mentioned Jeff Hafley doesn't even really like those that much, but he's a young guy who maybe with a change of scenery could really reach the potential that he never did necessarily with the Giants. And it just had my wheels turning. Are they still looking to fill that middle of the defense in some capacity? Because Quay is, again, I mentioned with Romeo Doubs, not necessarily a shoo-in to be staying on this team. And then you necessarily do have a need next to Edge Cooper.
Yeah, and I mean, they did draft Oladapo last year, so maybe they do like that kind of role. We just didn't get to see him. And I cut you off, Maggie. Sorry.
No, I was just going to say, I mean, they extended McDuffie in a limited role, knowing that, I think it's more of an injury thing, and he's very serviceable on special teams. He's a really good third inside linebacker. But yeah, Andrew, to your point about the safety is kind of going back a little bit. There's players like Jihad Campbell where it's oh man, if they were to slip at all at inside linebacker and you could pair somebody like that, not to say Quay's days are numbered, but it's like Barry said, we don't know what his outlook is going to be long term. So it certainly would be a position of need next draft if they don't take linebacker relatively high in this class. So I think there is a lot of interest there.
And I was going to mention Campbell, so I'm glad you provided that easy transition for me because I expect him to go pretty high. He could go in the top 10 theoretically. I definitely think even starting at the 49ers, there's a bunch of landmines there where teams probably will want to take him. Colts at 14, etc. If he slid, not only does that give you the opportunity to do what I really love, which is steal Aaron Glenn's defense, where you're just always playing base. You have 3 linebackers on the field all the time, but your linebackers are so athletic you can get away with it. And if that team wasn't decimated with injuries, that's what we would be talking about as what everybody else in the league is trying to steal, except the Eagles won, so now everybody wants pass rushers. But if you could have those 3 linebackers who would just stay on the field permanently, that's an advantageous situation to be in from a defensive standpoint. And Campbell versus somebody like Carson Schlesinger, who I think also could play that role, Campbell can pass rush. So you're also getting an edge rusher so that if you don't want to have 3 linebackers, you basically just kick him to one of the edge spots and you can still play nickel behind them. So that would be super fun. Nobody's talking about Jihad Campbell and the Packers, but if he falls, I think that's a very, very realistic pick.
To me, it's Jalen Walker, and I don't think there's any way that he could get to 23, but just because he's the Georgia player. It's the same way that Michael Williams is like the Packer guy because it's the Georgia prospect. But yeah, these inside linebackers that are tweeners and almost better edge rushers, but also play inside really well. It's like the perfect complement to Edge Cooper because we saw that in his wheelhouse in his rookie season. He's going to just continue to get better there. But yeah, I mean, that cupboard to me, like, there we go. Again, talking about the stacking of the cupboard, but I think that there is kind of a sneaky need there. The starters are established, but as we've seen on this roster so many times, you're one injury away from playing your very bottom of the depth chart. And inside linebacker in the Jeff Hafley defense is not necessarily a good thing. So I think that's where I want to wrap this with you guys. Just final thoughts about Jeff Hafley and if that changes the outlook for any of this, because we talked a little bit, I think, about this on some previous shows, but maybe Hafley's got a bug in Goody's ear about player preferences that he has that didn't fit the Pettin or the Joe Barry style of defense. So any thoughts that we like break the mold and we see a quote unquote outlier, or do you think it's kind of Goody's decision and then he'll fit the players where they need to be?
One of my issues with the whole like thresholds conversation has always been, if you truly can't make an exception to whatever rules exist in your player personnel choices, you're kind of a bad GM. Like if there's literally just a set of rules that say these are the players to take, these are the players not to take, which one of them are better than the others, like you're not doing your job. So I always take everything with a grain of salt. I think that there's a certain point where you have to provide the right players to fit the scheme that your coaches are trying to run. And you also have to balance that out with taking players who are going to be culture fits and like good long-term upside. So you're not just drafting all like Michigan players because you have Jim Harbaugh as your coach, but like you're taking players that fit within that scheme. So if Hafley doesn't have a voice in that room, then I would highly question what Brian Gutekunst is doing. And I can't imagine there's a situation where he's not at least taking that into consideration. So, we saw last year, like, yes, all three of the safeties they drafted had very different skill sets, but I think there's a point to that, right? Like you want players who have diverse skill sets, so you can play them in different roles within your scheme. I think we're starting to see that. So yeah, I wouldn't be surprised. And like, as crazy as a player like James Pierce Jr. would be to me, if that's the kind, like if Jeff Hafley says we need that bendy edge rusher to go with our big maulers that we have on the outside right now,
please,
I think they would do it. And like, I don't love that pick, don't get me wrong. But to Donovan Ezeraku, if you are only paying attention to the like thresholds, Donovan Ezeraku is off the board. I don't think he's off the board. I think he's a really high quality player that may be a little bit outside of what they typically look for. But if that's what Jeff Hafley wants in an edge rusher, I think they would be willing to go that route.
Boston College guy.
Yeah.
Sure. Yeah, I just echo Andrew. I think I feel a little less stringent about the thresholds. I think Goot and LaFleur, and at this point, Hafley being, the next big voice on the team, like I'm sure they have that working relationship where all of their input is being heard when it comes to the draft board. At the end of the day, naturally, it's Goot's decision. But to Andrew's point, if he's not listening to his defensive coordinator and what his defensive coordinator needs in order to make his side of the ball successful and like run his scheme, then like we have a much bigger issue than him picking out, in these like boxed thresholds. So we've also seen him do it, right? Like, I mean, his very first pick ever as GM was Jair Alexander, who was tiny compared to anyone they've ever picked at cornerback. So I don't think that I like that they have guidelines, but not strict rules, because for the most part, it's done them good, right? They have a successful football team with these ideas of what a successful player looks like. But you have to be flexible. And I think he continues to show that he is in relation to the regime before him.
Yeah, well said. Andrew, thank you so much for joining us on this episode. It's so fun every year. You and I and Kyle will have our on the clock segment coming out for Pack a Day later this week, but go ahead and tell the listeners where they can find you on social media, where they can find all the work you do, and if they want to check out your big board. I know you just released that about a week or so ago.
Yeah, so I'm exclusively on Blue Sky now. So if you're on that platform, you can just search for my name, and all my draft stuff is just pinned on there as well. But you can check out, Kyle and I have been doing an On the Clock series for Pack-A-Day Audio, and also on the Draft Fellows YouTube channel that covers all 32 teams. So it's 32 episodes long. We just finished recording, so those episodes will come out over the next week and a half on the Pack-A-Day Audio. So check those out. And then, of course, the Friday Pack-A-Day episodes with Kyle, Maggie, and myself. That's always super exciting. I'm pumped for what we're doing this week because it's my favorite episode of the whole year. And we will get all 3 selections correct.
No pressure. You always make me the GM, and then you put out these lofty promises, and I don't know that we've ever hit on any of the prospects that we have drafted. So
I think we got Edger and Cooper last year. I think.
Okay, well, take it. That's a good one. It's a gold star. But that is all the time that we have for today's show. You can find Perry at Perry_Goldstein on socials, me at Maggie J. Loney. I'm also only on Blue Sky now. So if you're looking for me, if there's a me on Twitter, it is not me. But you can find the podcast at PWSS Podcast or Pack's What She Said. Please like and subscribe to the show if you don't already. Please like and subscribe to the Draft Fellows on YouTube. Follow their work on social media. They are fantastic and they live for the draft all year round. So if you are itching for draft content, as soon as this one ends, not to put any pressure on you guys, but people are going to expect your work to get started for 2026. So, and we'll need you to study so we can have you back on the show next year. But thank you as always for listening. Make sure you follow Andrew, and Perry and I will be back next week to do our mock draft right before the draft actually kicks off. So it's always a fun one. We're looking forward to it. And go Pack Go.
Go Pack Go.
Go Pack Go.